Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. Today we have a very important poll out of the state of New Jersey for the 2025 governor's race, showing a very tight race between Democrat Mikey Sherrill and Republican Jack Ciattarelli. So this poll, which came out on Thursday, September 25th, was released by Emerson College Polling, and this one has been going around a lot on social media, as this poll has found that Mikey Sherrill, the Democrat, has 43% of the vote. And Jack Ciattarelli, the Republican, has also 43% of the vote. In a brief excerpt from the pollster, it said, "The first Emerson College General Election Survey of New Jersey's 2025 election for governor reveals a tightly contested race in the Garden State," said Spencer Kimball, the executive director of Emerson College Polling. And then it goes through the statistics of this, with young voters 18 to 29 breaking 56 to 18 for Sherrill over Ciattarelli. Still young, but older voters 60 to 28 for Sherrill, 40 to 49, 47 40, and the older you get, the more friendly it gets for Jack Ciattarelli. So this race in this poll is showing a very close competitive race at 43-43, with 3% saying they're supporting another candidate and 11% being undecided at this time. Now this poll is very big for a lot of reasons. The first being is thus far, this is the first poll that was not a partisan affiliated poll that shows a tied race. Now, it should be worth noting the only poll of all the New Jersey polls conducted thus far that had Jack Ciattarelli winning was the poll that came out back on Sunday, September 16th to 18th. It came out on Sunday online though, and this poll was sponsored by the Jack Ciattarelli for Governor campaign, and it showed a 1-point race for Ciattarelli over Sherrill at 46-45 with 9 points undecided. Now, in my past videos, I've said my rule of thumb for partisan polls that are affiliated with a campaign is I usually shift it about 5 points in the opposite direction of the pollster that or the candidate that the poll sponsored, because on average, that's usually how much the polls are off by. Emerson College, however, was one of the more accurate polls in 2024. Not the most accurate poll, but it was probably around the top 10 or so. And this poll is not affiliated by party, showing a tied race for Sherrill versus Ciattarelli. Now, it's important to talk about this poll with the context of the other polls as well, because despite this race being one of two governor's races up in 2025, when you really look at it, there hasn't been a ton of polling that's been conducted. This is the first poll from Emerson College. Quinnipiac, which you may have heard in 2024, just released its first poll in the race, and then some other local pollsters in New Jersey as well. But there's been 4 so far in the month of September. And they've shown that Quinnipiac, Sherrill was leading 49-41. The Jack Ciattarelli poll showed Ciattarelli up 46-45. Now this Emerson poll shows a tied race at 43-43. In a new poll that just came out from Yes Every Kid, a nonprofit education Lilly Foundation or PAC, I'm not too sure which it is specifically, but it shows Sherrill also leading 48-41. But these polls do actually have a lot in common. Aside from the one poll that showed Jack Ciattarelli leading, Mikey Sherrill's either winning or tied in 3 out of the 4 of them. The only one where that's not the case is the pollster campaign-affiliated one. It's also worth showing is despite being only about a month and like a week out from the election, there are still a lot of undecided voters in this race. This Emerson poll has 11% of respondents undecided. The Ciattarelli poll had 9% undecided. This Yes Every Kid poll, 10%. Quinnipiac, 6% undecided. So the undecided voters in this race still make up a large enough portion that they could heavily shift this race one way or the other. Now, that's going to be the main question for this race, but the numbers so far and the polling averages in the most recent polls do show a race that is getting narrower. And when you look at the numbers here, Real Clear Politics has Mikey Sherrill at 47.3, Jack Ciattarelli 40.8, overall a lead of 6.5%. But again, that other undecided number, 11.9%. Still enough to change which candidate could win this race. Decision Desk HQ, it's actually even closer. 46 to 42.4, Mikey Sherrill leads by 3.6. Race to the White House, 46.8 for Sherrill, 41.7 for Ciattarelli. Sherrill's up by 5.1. An average of these 3 polling aggregates shows Sherrill leading 46.7 to 41.6 to Ciattarelli, overall plus 5.1. The numbers in the last few weeks have shown a pretty consistent trend, which is this race is narrowing up. Now, at the same time, it also shows Mikey Sherrill continues to lead in this race, though she does lead by a smaller margin than before. And we can look at this as well with the context, if you want, of the 2021 New Jersey governor's race as well. We're going into the final few days of this race. The polling average showed Murphy, the governor, leading over Chitterelli by about 8 points, with 6.8% undecided. Now, what ultimately happened on the election results was essentially most of the independent voters broke for Jack Chitterelli. Chitterelli ended up getting 48% of the vote. Phil Murphy got 51.2% of the vote. So a very competitive 3.2% win for Phil Murphy in New Jersey. And you saw Jack Chitterelli do very well in a lot of very important counties in the state of New Jersey, including making some very notable gains. Winning Morris County by 11 points, winning Hunterdon by 18, losing Somerset by 4, almost winning Passaic, losing it for Chitterelli by about 4 points, and Bergen County as well. These key areas in Essex, in Passaic, and in Bergen are going to be very key to watch in this year's governor's race, as I do believe that Mikey Sherrill's congressional district encompasses parts of these counties up here. So this could play a very important role in seeing what election turnout looks like in these three areas. Now, for 2021, the polling also in the final few days or so showed Phil Murphy leading by about 5-6 points or so in a lot of these polls. Research Co. was up 6. Trafalgar, which is a Republican-aligned pollster, showed Murphy winning by 4. You see Rutgers-Eagleton up by 8 for Murphy versus Jack Chitterelli. Monmouth University 50-39. Now Emerson, obviously the poll just came out, showed about a 6-point race, 50-44 with 7% to go. Only poll that came out around this date of September 2025 was Stockton University, which showed a 9-point lead for Murphy versus Chitterelli. So Emerson overall, even though they had Murphy leading by 6 points over Chitterelli, if that trend continues, that'd be about a 3-point shift towards Chitterelli. Well, based on that, there could be enough support for Chitterelli to win if that was the only factor playing in this race when you compare it to their polling back in 2021. However, of course, we know that usually elections and polls don't often work that way. Polls are a very useful tool and give us a snapshot of the race, but as we learned with 2016, 2020, and 2024, they can sometimes be a little bit unreliable in these races. But for right now, what we're looking at is a very competitive race between Sherrill and Chitterelli. Now, the only bit of pause I have on this poll, and this is not a criticism or to dampen the Republicans' hopes in this race, it's more of just a statistical fact, which is at 43-43, there's still 11% undecided, and at that number, both Sherrill and Jack Chitterelli are underperforming what the Democrat and Republican did, both in 2021, and Chitterelli's only about a point higher than what the GOP did in 2017. So if you're confused what I mean by this, Murphy got 51.2, Chitterelli got 48, about, 5 points more for Chitterelli, and then about 8 points more for Phil Murphy, the Democrat. Now, even in 2017, which ended up being a big Democratic blowout win, Kim Godano only had 42.2%. Chitterelli's only 1 point above her. Phil Murphy had 55.7%. If you want to round up to 56 or so on that one, that would be about 13 points higher. So this poll from Emerson, it certainly shows this race is very competitive and both candidates are capable of winning. But it also shows there's a large amount of undecided voters left out in this race. That 11% are going to decide whether Mikey Sherrill or Jack Chitterelli ends up winning. So don't expect on election day for either Sherrill or Chitterelli to get 43% in the race. A third-party candidate would have to be getting around 10% of the vote or so to see something like this actually end up happening, which in all likelihood is not going to be the case. So that's the only little bit of a caveat I have on this race. But the actual numbers show a very tight contest with a lot of undecided voters left, looking at about a month left in this campaign. As for what this means right now, I think the trend is certainly that this race is narrowing up, but based on the amount of polls we've had beforehand and the poll immediately after, and given that 2025 is going to be governor elections taking place in a year that's supposed to be the anti-incumbent in the White House, does usually well. In this case, President Trump is the Republican president. Usually the Democrats are on track to do better in this election than the Republicans would. That being said, Mikey Sherrill and Jack Chitterelli is proving to be a very competitive election, so much so that I'm actually shifting my rankings in this race. Where before I had both Virginia and New Jersey going in the likely Democratic category, I'm now shifting it to lean Democratic, meaning I have it going under 5 points for the Democrats, but more than 1 point for the Democrats. Right now I have it around a 4 and a 4.5 point win for the Democrats at this current point in time. I think there are a lot of undecided voters out there, And similarly, what we saw in New Jersey in 2024 when Kamala Harris got 51.8, Donald Trump got 45.9, a lot of independents in New Jersey ended up breaking for Donald Trump that was not expected to do so. So much so that Morris County voted by 2.7% for Trump. Passaic County actually voted red for Trump over Harris, and Bergen was 3.4% for Harris over Trump. These are going to be some key areas to watch for, and I think if Jack Ciattarelli is running a race in New Jersey, that it's on the governor level, so a lot of these independent voters would actually probably be more likely to vote for a Republican at the governor level than a national race at the presidential level. I think we're going to see potentially an even closer matchup than what we saw in 2024, where Harris ended up winning by 5.9%. Now, obviously, I'll be doing videos and keeping updated on this race, because depending how the next month goes, this could totally shift the rankings for New Jersey. But for right now, I'm having New Jersey in the lean Democratic category in this very pivotal governor race. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like and subscribe. If you did, leave a comment below. Tell me your thoughts on this poll, on this video, on the New Jersey governor's race, and all of that. Make sure to leave it down in the comment section below. Again, also make sure to hit like and subscribe, as I post a new video every single day on the latest election news and predictions and such that are going on. Thank you so much for watching. I hope to see you in a future video. Hello everyone, and welcome to today's video. Today we are talking about the state of New Hampshire, the Granite State, and some news in its 2026 U.S. Senate race. Where on the Republican side, one candidate for the Senate has dropped out of the race and is supporting a potential U.S. Senate run by someone named Sununu. So, if you're unfamiliar in the story here, Republican State Senator Dan Innes was running for U.S. Senate against Scott Brown. Now, up until this point, it's only been Scott Brown and Dan Innes in the U.S. Senate race for the state of New Hampshire. But a few weeks ago, the brother and former U.S. Senator of Chris Sununu, John E. Sununu, of the state of New Hampshire, expressed interest in running for this race. So much so that several statewide Republicans have been encouraging Sununu to run, and that a draft John Sununu petition or campaign petition has been started to try and get him into this race. So there's been a lot of steam moving for John E. Sununu, the former U.S. Senator, to make a comeback run for the state of New Hampshire in 2026, especially as there is now an open Senate race with Jeanne Shaheen retiring, giving the Republicans a rare opportunity at potentially flipping a Senate seat from blue to red. Now, Innes was running against Scott Brown, the other Republican in the race. Innes was saying in his campaign that Scott Brown was not loyal enough or not conservative enough, and that Scott Brown would not be able to win. Now, Innes has suspended his race for the U.S. Senate and has supported John E. Sununu as the Republican he believes is a true Republican and can win this race. So right now, the way the race currently stands is that this Senate race is an open race. U.S. Representative of the 1st District, Chris Pappas, is the most notable Democrat in this race and is going to become the Democratic nominee and will face off against the Republicans. The Republicans right now, currently Scott Brown, the former Massachusetts U.S. Senator and nominee for Senate in New Hampshire in 2014, is the only declared Republican currently in this race. But by November of 2025, that could all be changing, with the former Senator John Sununu entering this race. And if Sununu does run, Scott Brown thus far has been very adamant that he will be staying in the race and that he believes a competitive primary between him and Sununu would be a good thing for the party, and that would make a better general election candidate. So Scott Brown, has been very adamant he will not drop out of the race if Sununu jumps in. And thus far, the early polling data was a poll from Coefficient, a Republican pollster, from September 10th to 12th. It showed Sununu starting out with 40% of the vote, Scott Brown at 23%, 24% undecided. So there would be enough undecided voters in the Republican primary to essentially give Scott Brown the lead in the race, but right now it's clear John Sununu starts out with a big lead over Scott Brown, roughly about 17 points in this poll. So it shows the weight that the Sununu name and Sununu family has, not just in New Hampshire, but also in the New Hampshire Republican primary as well. So why is this significant? Is there really a difference between John Sununu or Scott Brown being the Republican candidate? Well, thus far, actually shows yes. So much so that when you look at the early polling, 2 polls have been conducted, that same Coefficient Republican pollster and one of the top political colleges in New Hampshire, in St. Anselm College, who does a lot of polling. And they have shown 2 polls now with Chris Pappas leading over Scott Brown by more than 10 points. Even in a Republican poll, Chris Pappas is 50%, Scott Brown is 40%, with 10% undecided. basically without any undecideds going either way, Pappas already has roughly enough support to win this race. He would need literally 0.1% of the undecided voters to win against Scott Brown. Whereas in the St. Anselm poll, which is not affiliated with a party, a much larger registered voter sample size, and this one, Pappas starts out with an 11-point lead. 48%, Scott Brown 37%, 15% undecided. Again, there's enough undecided votes there for Scott Brown to come back and win, but it would be a very difficult uphill battle based on these two polls. Now, for Chris Pappas versus John Sununu, a little bit of a different story. There's only been two polls conducted, coefficient in 1892 polling, both of which are Republican-aligned pollsters. Now, it should be worth noting, when the Sununu news came out that he was considering a run, the St. Anselm poll was already out. But it showed in these two Republican polls, that Chris Pappas led 46%, but John Sununu was already starting out at 43%. And the other poll from 1892 polling showed that Pappas had 45, Sununu also had 43, with 11% and 12% undecided. Now, these are both Republican polls, and the general rule that I use is I usually shift a partisan poll 5 points to the opposite political party of the pollster, due to the fact that they usually overvalue the candidate by about 5 points. But even if I did that, Pappas is leading Sununu here by 3 points. If I shifted it 5 points, that would be Pappas up by 8. In this poll, Pappas is leading by 2. 5-point shift would be about a 7-point lead. Even then, the St. Anselm poll, which again for Pappas versus Brown, is an 11-point lead. The coefficient poll is a 10-point lead. If I shifted that 5 points as well, it would be a 15-point lead. So it shows, at very least right now, even in the Democrats, like accounting for the Democrats' potential shift there, that Chris Pappas has a tougher time at winning the Senate race against John Sununu than he does against Scott Brown in the early polling in this race. And a large reason for that very well could be the popularity of the Sununu name in the state of New Hampshire, where Chris Sununu, in 2024, Kelly Ayotte was elected governor, but in 2022, Chris Sununu, his brother, won by 15.5%. In 2020, on the same election night where Joe Biden defeated Donald Trump in New Hampshire by about 7 points, Chris Sununu won by 32 points in that governor's race. 2018, one of the very big Democratic midterm wave years, Chris Sununu won re-election as governor by 7 points. And in 2016, where Donald Trump narrowly lost to Hillary Clinton in the state of New Hampshire in a very close matchup, Sununu won by 2.3%. And Sununu and the political name of his family have really only gotten stronger over the last few cycles in the state of New Hampshire. But that is at the governor level. Senator Sununu himself has a little bit of background to run off of as well. In 2002, John Sununu faced off in this race against Democrat Jeanne Shaheen, who at the time I believe was the governor of New Hampshire, or the former governor at that point running for Senate. In this race in 2002, John Sununu won by 4.4% against Shaheen, a very close race, but he broke 50%. That was very notable. And when you look at the map of New Hampshire, it's actually very similar to a competitive map of what New Hampshire would look like today, with both Rockingham County and Hillsborough County being Republican, and then you also see other counties like Sullivan, Belknap, and Carroll going red as well. The only difference is Colfax County going blue. But still a very significant development for that race in 2002. Now, 8 years later, we see Jeanne Shaheen run against Sununu again for a rematch, but in this one, in 2008, obviously 2008, Barack Obama was elected president. It was a very big Democratic year, and now we know the political powerhouse that is Jeanne Shaheen in the state of New Hampshire. Shaheen wins by 6.3%, which comparatively to how the presidential race went in 2008 was actually not too bad. When you realize that Barack Obama defeated John McCain by 9.6% in New Hampshire, we saw Sununu do approximately about 3 points more to the right than that. But you see New Hampshire here, Rockingham County barely goes red, you see Belknap and Carroll barely go red, but you see Hillsborough go blue. I've gone over Hillsborough in other videos as well, but essentially for the Republicans to win the state of New Hampshire, they need Hillsborough County to be going red, as the populations of Rockingham and Hillsborough combined, being Republican wins, give the Republicans a little bit of enough vote to be competitive, not guaranteeing a win, but it gives them enough votes to be competitive. If Hillsborough is going blue, there's a very likely chance the Democrat is winning that race. So that's what it looked like in 2008. Now, 2014, very strong Republican midterm wave year. Jeanne Shaheen's in a tough race against former Massachusetts Senator Scott Brown, who, after losing to Elizabeth Warren in 2012, moves up to New Hampshire, runs for Senate, close race, but Shaheen wins by 3.2%. Now, this Senate race in 2020 was not very close. Shaheen faced off against the Republican Mesner, not as strong as a candidate as Sununu or Brown was, and Shaheen ended up winning by 15.6%. Now, the other Senate race in 2022 wasn't great for the Republicans either, where Maggie Hassan ended up defeating the Republican Don Bolduc by 9.1%. Though again, I would argue Bolduc is not as strong as a Republican candidate as Sununu or Brown was either. But that's where the Democrats are right now at the Senate level. The Democrats have held the Senate seats in New Hampshire for a pretty long time now. The last super close Senate race we saw was in 2016, when Democrat Maggie Hassan, the governor, defeated Kelly Ayotte, the Republican incumbent, now governor, by 0.14%. And this race could be a glimpse of what a super competitive race would look like, where Kelly Ayotte did what she needed to do. She won Rockingham County, she won Hillsborough County, she won Belknap and Carroll counties, and she won Coos County. But ultimately what ended up happening was Maggie Hassan won very narrowly by roughly about 1,000 votes. So this is what a super close race would look like. Now, it's going to be a big if that even if Johnny Sununu decides to run, can he make this race super competitive? I think that Sununu will make this race, if he enters, more competitive against Chris Pappas than perhaps Scott Brown would be or other Republicans would be in the state. But the question is, can Sununu actually win? Because winning a Senate race in the state of New Hampshire is different than winning a governor's race. For a lot of reasons, governor's races are usually less partisan and nationalized than Senate races are. For instance, New Hampshire has a long voting history of voting for the Democrats at the top of the presidential ticket going back to the year 2004. Despite it being very close at times, Democrats have consistently won. At the Senate level, every Senate race since 2016 has gone to, since 2014, has gone to the Democrats. So for Sununu to run in this race against Chris Pappas, it gives the Republicans a rare opportunity at being competitive in this race. But I also don't think it guarantees the Republicans will win. I think it just guarantees that this race will be competitive. But it is very interesting, this news, that Dan Innes is dropping out of the race because it leaves Scott Brown and Johnny Sununu as the only two notable Republicans in this race and setting up essentially a collision course between two Republicans, one being from a popular New Hampshire political family that just had the governor of the state for 5 or 6 terms or so in the state, or 4 or 5 terms or so in the state of New Hampshire, facing off against the former Massachusetts U.S. Senator and nominee in 2014 that certainly has proven his ability to fundraise in great numbers. So it could be a very divided primary as well. It also should be worth noting New Hampshire is one of the latest primary schedules in the country, I believe wrapping up in the second week of September before the general election. So if Brown and Sununu go the whole distance or so, they will only have about 2 to 3 months to make their pitch to the grand state voters. Whereas Chris Pappas, running as the only notable Democratic candidate right now, essentially has like a year and 2 to 3 months or so to make his case. So I think this is a very interesting development in the New Hampshire Senate race as we await the announcement from John Sununu and what he'll decide to do in this race, and if he enters, what Scott Brown decides to do. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like and subscribe if you did. Leave a comment below. Tell me your thoughts on this Senate race, on this video, on the state of New Hampshire, who you think will win between Pappas and Sununu or Pappas and Brown, and all of that. Also, make sure to hit subscribe as well, as I post at least one video every single day that you're not going to want to miss. It's always about the latest election news and election predictions. Thank you so much for watching. I hope to see you in a future video. Hello everyone, and welcome to today's video. Today we have some very big important news for the 2026 governor election in the state of Wisconsin, where Republican Representative Tom Tiffany, a name that has been speculated that he could be running for governor and would be probably the Republicans' best chance in this race, has officially announced that he is running for the open Wisconsin's governor's race. Now, this governor's race is open as the current Democratic governor of the state of Wisconsin, Tony Evers, has officially announced he will not be running for a 3rd term, and it's setting up an open race on both the Democratic and Republican sides. And with Tom Tiffany entering this race, this is now the most notable Republican to enter this race, and what should be one of the closest governor's races in all of the United States in 2026. So, okay, this is the news for this video. Now the backstory on this race. As I mentioned, Tony Evers, the current governor, is not going to seek a 3rd term. And that is leading a wide open race on the Democratic side, with several Democrats running, including the Lieutenant Governor of Wisconsin, Sarah Rodriguez, and David Crowley, Milwaukee County Executive, I would argue as the two most notable Democrats currently running at this current point in time, with a lot of other state representatives and state senators running as well. Now, another Democrat that's expressed interest, that's a very notable name, is Mandela Barnes, the former lieutenant governor of Wisconsin from 2019 and 2023. He's expressed interest in this race. If he were to enter, he could make the Democratic primary very interesting as well. There are lots of other Democrats that could run as well that have not made any announcement clear at this current point in time. So the Democratic side of things, right now, it probably would be Sarah Rodriguez in the current Democratic primary field, but that could all change if Mandela Barnes jumps in or if David Crowley gets a huge influx of support. But for now, let's go with the assumption that Sarah Rodriguez ends up winning a crowded Democratic primary. I'm also making that assumption as there's not currently any polling data done for the Democratic primary at this current point in time. Now, on the Republican side, the Republicans had two candidates running in Bill Berrien and Josh Schoemann. Neither one of them is super well known in the state of Wisconsin to the likes of a U.S. congressman or a former governor or such in that regard. Now, Tom Tiffany, the U.S. representative from the 7th District, has been the name to watch for the Republicans for a while now as someone that could be entering this race. And I said at the start of the video, and I do believe it, from an electability and candidate quality standpoint, that I do believe Tom Tiffany does present the Republicans the best opportunity at winning this race. I saw some posts on X online as him being described as someone that would be a little bit more policy focused and less so about rhetoric and such online. We'll have to wait and see, obviously, as the campaign unfolds, if that'll be true or not. But someone like that, I think, would give the Republicans a stronger opportunity in this race than someone that's probably more, I would say, outspoken and such in the race. Now, obviously, we'll have to wait and see how that all develops, but I do believe Tom Tiffany presents the Republicans their best candidate for this race. Now, don't take me saying that I believe Tiffany is the best Republican candidate as a guaranteed he is going to be the next governor of Wisconsin, because that is not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is, in this current Republican primary, I think Tom Tiffany becomes the Republican nominee without too much of a problem. Now, again, the only other Republican that's filed paperwork to run is Andy Mansk. There are also some other Republicans that could run as well, like Sean Duffy, Eric Hovde, Rebecca Kleefisch, Tim Michaels, or Tommy Thompson, but none of them have specifically made any indication that they're interested in running in this race, at least for right now anyway. Now, Tiffany already has the endorsement of fellow Representative Tony Weed, Anthony Christian Weed, I believe is how it's pronounced. And the early polling data from Fabrizio Lee & Associates, that's President Trump's one of his top pollsters, showed Tiffany leading 40% to Schoemann's 13% and Berrien's 10%. So it shows Tiffany starts out with a commanding lead over the Republican primary. Now, for the general election, no surprise here. As of September 11th for the Cook Political Report, August 28th for Inside Elections, Sabo's Crystal Ball, on September 4th in Race to the White House, September 11th, all showed this governor's race as a complete and total toss-up. And if you've been following U.S. elections the last 10 years or so, it makes a lot of sense. Wisconsin has been routinely one of, if not the closest state consistently in United States elections for a while at the presidential level. It voted for Donald Trump in 2024 by just 0.86%. In 2020, it voted for Joe Biden over Donald Trump by just 0.63%, so an even smaller number overall margin. And in 2016, it voted for Donald Trump by 0.76%. That's 3 presidential elections in a row over the last 9 years or so that has shown a under 1 point margin at the presidential level for the state of Wisconsin. So at that level, it's certainly a super competitive state. At the governor level, it's been a little bit of a larger lead on the numbers, though not by a whole lot. In 2022, Evers won re-election against the Republican Tim Michaels, winning by 3.4%, a lean Democratic win. Still, 3.4%, not a super large margin like Michigan's 10.5%, but still a pretty big win for Evers, all things considering. Now, in 2018, Tony Evers defeated the Republican governor Scott Walker by 1.1%. So the last 2 governor's races, including one in a Democratic midterm against a Republican incumbent, and a Democratic governor going up against a Republican in a Republican midterm year, both of which were pretty competitive as well. And then at the Senate level, just to show you briefly, no surprise here, super competitive races. 2024, Tammy Baldwin defeats Republican Eric Hovde by 0.85%. 2022, Ron Johnson wins by just 1% in the Senate race. Wisconsin, across the board, has been one of the most competitive races or states at the presidential, Senate, and governor level. In 2026, I fully expect it to be so once again. Now, what's interesting about the state of Wisconsin is you're looking at the map. This is what Donald Trump did in 2024, where he won 49.6 to 48.7. And a large reason why Trump was able to do that, aside from getting a lot of votes up in the big or the smaller rural areas that President Trump won big, like Taylor 48.1 or Rusk by 30 points or so, Trump made a lot of important marginal gains in the area surrounding Dane County, which is where Madison is, and Milwaukee, which is obviously where Milwaukee is. A county like Columbia voted for Donald Trump by 4.6% in 2024. Sauk voted for Trump by 1.7%. Look at 2020. Columbia only voted for Trump by 1.7%, and Sauk voted for Biden by 1.7 as well. So these two counties are very important to watch. Now, Iowa County voted for Kamala Harris by 7.6% in 2024. In 2020, Biden won it by 13.7. So even though this one didn't flip red, the margins in which the Democrat wins it by makes a very big difference. Like in Greene County, Kamala Harris won it by 0.27%. In 2020, Biden won it by 3.2. Another county that voted blue, but President Trump made a lot of marginal gains there. And Rock County, 11.2% win for Joe Biden. 2024, 7.3%. So these areas, these counties of Rock, Greene, Iowa, Sauk, and Columbia are 5 very important counties to watch for in this governor's race when it comes down to it for 2026. If it's Sarah Rodriguez versus Tom Tiffany, how these areas are voting by margin of victory are going to be crucial to determining how well this is going. It should also be worth noting, I mentioned the competitive areas around Madison. What about Madison itself? Dane County voted 51.5% margin of victory for Harris over Trump, a very large number. Now let's look back at 2020. Joe Biden won at 52.6, so only about a 1-point difference between 2020 and 2024. But in an election that's super close, like Wisconsin is, that 1% difference in margin of victory could make the difference between winning and losing if you're a Democrat or a Republican in the state of Wisconsin. So that 1% could be very big. Now let's move to Milwaukee. Milwaukee voted for Kamala Harris by 38.4% over Donald Trump in 2024. 2020, 39.9%. So in this one, about 1.5% shift. Again, in a super close race, with so many people living in this one tiny county, that will make the difference between winning or losing. So very big margins, very important margins there in Milwaukee as well. Now these two counties, Racine and Kenosha, are 2 suburban counties as well right outside of Milwaukee that also played very pivotal roles in this state. Racine voted for Trump by 4.1 in 2020, Kenosha 3.1. 2024, Trump won Racine by 6.2, Kenosha by 6.2. If these counties are under 5 points in 2026, this likely means the Democrat is outperforming Kamala Harris's number from 2024, and the Republican, if it's Tom Tiffany, could potentially be in trouble. Because if we're seeing Racine County and Kenosha County trending towards the Democrats, well, then we're probably seeing the greater counties around Madison likely trending blue as well. So these are the key areas in Wisconsin I'm watching for on election night 2026 in the state of Wisconsin to determine how the governor's race is going. Now, no surprise, for the governor map for 2026, I have Wisconsin starting out in the toss-up category. It is currently one of 5 governor's races that I have in the toss-up category after I did move Kansas to likely Republican, which I expected to be for right now. Based on this right now, I do truly believe Wisconsin could go either way, could go Democrat or it could go Republican, but I do think at this current point in time, given that 2026 is supposed to be more of a Democratic midterm turnout year, I would start Wisconsin very narrowly in the Democratic category, going blue by under 1 point. But I think this is certainly a race that's very close, that both the Democrats and Republicans could potentially win. But I want to hear what you think about this race. If Tom Tiffany runs, for one, do you think he'll be the Republican nominee? And 2, do you think he could win the general election against the Democrats in the state of Wisconsin? Make sure to leave your thoughts all down in the comments section below. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like and subscribe. If you did, as I mentioned, leave a comment below. And please hit subscribe because I post one new video at least every single day on all the latest election news and election predictions that I know you are not going to want to miss. Thank you so much for watching and hope to see you in a future video.